Hello and welcome to Policy Watch. I am Vivian Fernandes. The budget exercise will begin shortly in earnest for presentation in Parliament in July. A lot is expected from the Modi government. The foremost task is to put government finances in order by getting a grip on subsidies. This should not be interpreted as a move against the poor. Rather, by shrinking its spending, the government will reduce money supply in the economy and bring down the rate of inflation. And inflation, as we know, is a tax on the poor. In this episode, we'll focus on three aspects. One is the NDA's fiscal agenda. Second, the appreciation of the rupee and what it means for exports. And third, the relaxation on gold imports. My guest is Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy of the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. I understand that you had done a roadmap for fiscal consolidation for the Finance Commission. So your presence is quite apt over here. Number one, last year, Finance Minister P. Chidambaram was able to meet the fiscal deficit target of 4.8%. In fact, he contracted it to 4.6%. But do you think the manner in which he achieved it was something that is good for the economy?
Well, I think on the headline side, if you look at the fiscal deficit has been brought down to 4.6%, which everybody thought it was not possible 1 year back, that it's a good sign. But my worry is that how the process of bringing down the fiscal deficit to 4.6% seems to have resulted in containing the capital expenditure component. Because if you look at the revenue deficit of this 4.6 is much higher than what the Kelkar committee has suggested in 2012.
What was it?
So it was around 2.8. I think it has gone to 3.2% in the revenue.
Actually, the revenue deficit in the last in 2012-2013 was 2.2%, which was which exceeded the target of 1.8%.
Right.
Whereas the fiscal deficit, of course, was brought down. And you are very right. The revenue expenditure overshot the target by about 5,000 crores.
That's right.
And the non-plan expenditure, it was contracted by about 75,000 crores. And within that, capital expenditure came down by 38,000 crores.
That's right.
So capital expenditure took a very big hit.
Right.
And that is how the finance minister was able to.
Yeah, that kind of correction. That kind of correction is not good for the economy. In fact, our own analysis recently we found that if you are containing the fiscal deficit by reducing the capital expenditure, that is going to have negative impact on the growth. Okay, my concern is that it's very important to ring fence the capital expenditure target. So whether you are achieving the fiscal deficit target or not, that doesn't really matter. But so I think the capital expenditure should be.
The quality of spending is more important than the quantum of spending.
The quality of adjustment is more important for the growth recovery than the fiscal deficit reduction itself.
Now, this year, the former finance minister has set a target of 4.1% of GDP as a fiscal deficit. And there are a lot of subsidies. For example, subsidies is provided for is 2,55,000 crore rupees. Do you think it's an underestimate?
Well, these are all budgeted numbers. I mean, we need to wait and see what the actual number is going to be. I think in that sense, the midterm appraisal of the budgets are very, very important, although we don't take it very seriously. So even if they can achieve 2.8 lakh crore subsidy, it's still a big number. Particularly, this is based on the assumption that the gradual decrease in the oil subsidy continues over a period of 1 year. So I think there are lots of assumptions that have been made, particularly in the interim budget, to bring down the subsidy itself.
Yes. In the case of, let's break down the subsidies. One is you have petroleum subsidies, you have fertilizer subsidies, and you have food subsidies. In the case of petroleum subsidies, the former finance minister has left them unchanged. But these were all based on assumption that that oil would be at about $100 to a barrel. And now we find that oil is already trading at $110 to the barrel. And there are a large number of under recoveries. For example, in the case of diesel, we find that the under recovery is 4 rupees 41 paise per litre. In the case of kerosene, PDS kerosene is 33 rupees. And in the case of cooking gas, it's about 426 rupees per cylinder. So that is the extent of under recovery per cylinder. Do you think this government will be able to get a grip on petroleum subsidies?
No, I think to make this issue a little more broad, the whole issue of under recovery itself is questioned. in Indian context.
Why do you say that?
See, the way they estimate the under recovery based on the trade parity pricing itself, many of us are questioning.
But this was achieved, this was arrived at on the basis of a formula done by the former Reserve Bank Governor Chakravarti Rangarajan.
That's based on 2006 assumption. I think right now we are in 2014. And even Dr. Rangarajan himself said that this formula was appropriate in 2006. We need to really look at it. And in fact, if you look, I think the CAG is actually looking at this whole process of under recovery. We are only waiting for the report to come out. And
so what we'll do is let's leave the issue of under recovery, the formula aside. But it would be a fair assumption to say that the oil companies are recovering less than what the people pay.
Right, but the number that you said, 4 rupees, is based on the under recovery process. Okay. It doesn't mean that the oil companies are not making profit. So I think one needs to really look at the whole sector per se. I mean, the pricing itself is becoming an issue. The under recovery concept itself is being debated. And at the same time, there is a huge subsidy stock. If you look at the under recovery versus the subsidy, over a period of time, subsidy is well below the under recovery which the oil companies are facing. So overall, I agree with you, there is a subsidy component, but the 4 rupees seems to be coming from the current estimation process. But the other point, Vivian, that you raised about the $100 per barrel assumption, these are all assumptions. I think one needs to, even the budget estimates are assumptions 1 year ahead of it. And let me complete it. This $100 is based on the Indian commodity basket. It is not the 110 which we see in the Brent. So that is always less than, our import is always less than 110. So in a sense,
that is because we import a variety of crudes.
Plus we also import from Dubai, which is slightly lower than the Brent.
Okay. Yeah. But how do we tackle all the same? Let's suppose that the subsidies that the oil that the under recoveries or the losses that the oil companies say are exaggerated, but they are not off the mark. Right. They might be, there's still an element of subsidy which the consumers get.
Right.
Now, how do we tackle that? Because this government has said that is not in favor of Aadhaar. Right. So, is there a way in which we can target the subsidies? For example, kerosene subsidies are required for the poor because they use it for lighting.
Right.
Similarly, I don't think any government can increase cooking gas prices by a very huge amount.
Right.
So, how do we target the subsidies at the very poor?
No, first of all, kerosene itself is an inferior good. We know that the subsidy component is very high. I think the government should see such a way that the consumers consume less. In fact, Delhi is a classic example where kerosene has been banned. Okay, I think so that should be the policy towards reduction of the subsidy, not just tinkering with the prices. You may have to provide incentives for the consumers outside Delhi also to shift their consumption from kerosene to gas. That is a better commodity in that sense. In terms of the Aadhaar, I think I am slightly disappointed with this government's view that...
Professor Bhanumurthy, on the issue of Aadhaar, we'll keep the discussion alive into the break. We'll have to take a break. But after the break, we'll talk about the appreciation of the rupee and what it means for imports as well as exports and India's manufacturing sector. But before that, we'll have a small discussion on the remaining two aspects of the subsidies, that is food subsidy and fertilizer subsidy. Stay with us. We'll come back to you in just a minute. Welcome back to Policy Watch. We are discussing the NDA's agenda, particularly with regard to fiscal consolidation, the appreciation of the rupee and what it means for India's manufacturing sector, as well as the RBI's relaxation on gold imports. Professor Bhanumurthy, before the break, you were talking about Aadhaar and that you were a little disappointed with this government. Why are you disappointed?
Well, I think there seems to be a pressure on the governments to continue the kind of wrong thing that have been doing for past 60 years. Until unless you don't identify who are the beneficiary, you cannot even distribute a single penny in a objective manner. And this is exactly what Aadhaar was supposed to do. In fact, Delhi is a classic example again, how this Aadhaar-based system was very useful in distributing the LPG subsidy.
But at the same time, we have the former Defense Minister, A.K. Antony, who has said that he had received a lot of complaints apparently about how Aadhaar-based payments for cooking gas purchases were not very effective. And
There could be some defense related or security related concerns, but it doesn't mean that nobody else in the world is using this kind of system. I think whole US is, everybody has one number. I think that is somewhere which is useful for social sector development schemes as well as public delivery mechanism. In fact, the classic case is that during the crisis, by pressing one button, US government could distribute all the cash transfer to all the citizens of this country. So that's how you create aggregate demand, not by just allocating without any institutional setup. So in fact, this is exactly what the Aadhaar scheme was doing in Delhi, particularly the LPG. One should do the study on how Aadhaar-based system helped reduce the leakages in the Delhi.
In Delhi, if I'm not mistaken, the payments were made directly into the bank account.
Right.
So perhaps we must have a graduated system, a calibrated approach, where in the cities or the well-banked areas, we can apply Aadhaar. And in those areas where we do not have a good banking network, perhaps we can continue with the existing
situation. I think that's a good point you raised. In fact, the Aadhaar was actually helping to increase the financial inclusion. Again, that is something which the whole rural segment should be done. That's something we need to really go ahead and a war footing.
And the BJP government has said in its manifesto that it's going to lay a lot of emphasis on e-governance.
Right. So in that, I think Aadhaar would be a very big instrument for e-governance system. In fact, again, I talk about Andhra Pradesh. I've been talking about Andhra Pradesh everywhere. Andhra Pradesh, in terms of public delivery mechanism, again a classic state, where the e-governance system has been utilized in a very, very big manner.
And they've used smart cards, which Chandrababu Naidu, who is going to be the chief minister of Seemandhra, he popularized.
Yes, in fact, even MGNREGA, for that matter, the kind of success Andhra Pradesh government, I'm not saying there is no leakages, but the kind of success, even if you say 70% succeeded, 75% succeeded, which itself is a big success for any social sector programs in this country since independence. So I think all the public sector programs should be linked to the e-governance.
Since we do not have too much time to discuss, one issue about food subsidies. Now, the UPA government enacted the food security bill and the act has been passed. And there have been a lot of criticism about that. The BJP government has also said that it is going to implement it. Do you think that this scheme can be implemented in a way where the current leakages are minimized?
No, Food Security Act per se, if you implement without consolidating with other social sector programs, that is going to put a big burden on the exchequer. I think there is no second opinion about that. But thankfully, the government has the Chaturvedi committee recommendations, where you are trying to consolidate a large number of centrally sponsored schemes, bringing down from 140 plus to 60, is going to help in a big way. And at the same time, if you can succeed in implementing the food security bill in toto, the pressure on other schemes would also decline. So, and that's the point I'm trying to say. You cannot give all the benefits to one person. So, if you have a Aadhaar-based system, you know who is benefiting what and how much somebody is benefiting. Otherwise, few people will be benefiting all the schemes.
So, do you think that income supplementation with the help of Aadhaar, where you transfer the money directly into the beneficiary's bank account, is much better than the current system where we supply grain to the people, and then that creates a whole lot of people.
Why are you forcing people to eat only grain? Don't limit them to eat only grains.
The other issue which we raised before we got into in this break is about the strengthening of the rupee. It's currently trading at 58, 51 to the dollar. Last August, it touched an all-time low of nearly 69 rupees to the dollar. Since then, it has appreciated quite a lot. What does that mean for India's exports? Because all along we saw when the rupee depreciated, our exports went up. So are we likely to now see our exports dip?
No, I don't agree with that kind of correlation. Particularly if you look at empirically, if at all there was some sort of rise in the export earnings when the rupee has depreciated, is mostly the earnings which have been already done, which is bringing back to the country. They are supposed to retain for 1 year. So once we export, in a sense, they are bringing back the export earnings which they have done even before exchange rate depreciated. In fact, my own study says, particularly on the manufacturing exports, you cannot be competitive with a simple weakening of rupee. So I think in India, manufacturing sector exports are mostly import led. So I don't see that kind of relationship between exchange rate depreciation and exports. There may be some kind of relation when we talk about services exports in the short term, but in the medium to long term for manufacturing exports, I don't see this weak rupee going to help.
What is the import intensity of our exports? Because if you look at China, they import a lot because they put those imported components into their exports. In India, is this happening?
Like for example, you take the crude oil. I mean, we have become one of the biggest exporter of processed crude oil. And if you look at the import content, it's a 20%, right? If you look at the import content of total exports, it's 20%. So similarly on gems and jewelry, pharmaceutical, there are many industry, the import content is increasing over a period of time. So I think that needs to be kept in mind when we intervene in the market to contain the exchange rate appreciation.
Professor, I'll just come back to this issue in a bit. But before that, we'll have to take a break. When we return, the RBI relaxes curbs on gold imports. Welcome back. Earlier this week, Reserve Bank allowed a category of exporters called star and premium trading houses to import gold. Since July last year, only permitted banks were allowed. The RBI has also allowed added 5 more banks to the list of gold importers. Imports have to be done under what is known as the 2080 scheme. That is, from each lot of imports, 20% has to be made available for export purposes. The curbs were imposed in July last year to check the high current account deficit. The current account deficit is the excess of imports of merchandise goods and invisibles like services, royalty payments, and payments for technology over exports of both goods and such services. Since the current account is likely to halve to 2.5% this year, the Reserve Bank has taken this step. Professor, the Reserve Bank's move to allow gold imports, no one can quibble about that because, from the time it imposed those curbs, smuggling activity has increased. Do you think that we are in a position now, can we be very comfortable with the current account deficit for the Reserve Bank of India to take this step?
Well, I mean, we have come a long way. I think from last year, almost hitting 6% current account deficit to now 2.5 or 3%. I think that is giving some kind of a room for the central bank to relax some of the restrictions they brought in around middle of last year to contain the gold import in particular. But unfortunately, I think India, you cannot control gold import. I mean, we have seen lots of cases reported near the airports in terms of smuggling of gold. So these are only the gold which have been caught. I mean, some more, we are very sure that many more items have been really uncaught. So in a sense, the recent inflow of foreign capital, particularly coming from the FIIs, which seems to be putting pressure on the rupee to appreciate, and that seems to be giving some kind of room for the central bank to relax all those restrictions. So in that sense,
has India's appetite for gold come down?
No, I don't think it will come down because that's part of our culture. I mean, I think one should assume that you cannot.
So this move by the Reserve Bank to relax gold imports, is it mainly meant to help the gems and jewelry export sector?
Well, I think again that 2080 still retains. I mean, even if you are importing, you have to export 20%. That still retains. But the more important point is that if you want to really contain the smuggling component, okay, I think one needs to really relax all these restrictions. There is no second opinion about that. I think RBI had done a good job by relaxing. But my own worry is that you cannot really keep on changing the policies, and tinkering here and there.
You require some kind of stability.
Some kind of stability.
But I'm sure the Reserve Bank Governor Raghuram Rajan knows this because, after all, I mean, he has been an economist with international financial institutions. He is a free marketer himself. I think these curbs were imposed.
But the market participants are much more smarter than regulators. That one should keep in mind.
Now, the Reserve Bank had also introduced the inflation-indexed bond because it thought that Indians were investing in gold as a hedge against inflation. So it introduced another instrument called this inflation-indexed bond. How has that worked?
No, I don't think it has taken off. I mean, I don't really see any kind of investment happening.
Is that because of the lack of awareness?
One is that there is a lack of awareness. The other is that from the time that bonds have come into picture, there seems to be a recovery in the stock market behavior also. So the lot of investment seems to have shifted to the stock market kind of stuff rather than going into the inflation index bonds, because there it's a return is fixed. But in the stock market, I think there was some expectation that you can get more return than what you get in the inflation index bonds.
So are you saying that the people who are investing in the inflation index bonds are people who are also investing in stock markets and not necessarily people who are playing safe and investing in fixed deposits?
It is like putting in fixed deposits. I mean, inflation index bond is nothing but a fixed deposit. Those who are looking for a risk-free, assured return kind of a thing. But I think that kind of money is not going to stock market. They must be still going to the FDs, which is giving much better return than the inflation index bond. So the money which is going to the gold and the stock markets are more of a speculative money, which is looking for higher return even by taking little bit of risk.
The fixed deposits you said are giving a higher return, but that is before tax,
right?
I would imagine.
Right.
After tax, because fixed deposit interest is subject to taxation.
Right.
So after the deduction of tax, are they still better option than inflation index bonds?
When you're looking for a long term, I mean, the fixed deposits are not a short term investments. When you're looking for a long term, but the interest rates are fixed, like if you're following interest rate cycle, if you're investing for 5 years down the line, you should expect a much slightly better return than what you are expecting this year.
The inflation index bonds, do they adequately take care of inflation? Are they indexed to the consumer price inflation or to wholesale price?
So initially they started with WPI, now they converted into CPI, now. So I think they have done what they are supposed to do. Still it has not picked up because it looks like the investors are not really, as you rightly point out, may not be really aware of regarding these bonds.
What is the experience elsewhere, for example, in the United States, where they have such instruments?
Yeah. No, well, US is a very different market, I'll tell you. Every day, every citizen will look forward for how much gratuity is going to get, by looking at their mutual funds. I'm not sure in India how much financialization that our incomes are happening. I think ours is a very small proportion compared to US. So we still have look for infrastructure bonds where you have a assured return, tax-free bond, that kind of things. And we are very different. I think we should not compare with the US kind of system.
This relaxation on gold imports brings me to the topic we were discussing in the previous segment,
right,
and that's about the import intensity
right,
of some of our exports.
Right.
I would imagine that gems and jewelry would be one of those categories,
right,
where the import intensity is quite high.
Right. Yes, I mean, it's very clear. I mean, that everybody knows about it. Gems and jewelry, we have a very great value addition, and the import content is very high. And in fact, if you look at other segments like automobiles, pharmaceuticals, the import content over a large number of studies have showed that, except in the textiles, and most of the industries have seen a higher import intensity. Otherwise, you cannot compete in the international market.
So, but sir, the conventional wisdom is that when you import, when the rupee appreciates, imports become cheaper.
Right.
And when you import more, you are actually exporting jobs.
Right. No, well, I mean, it is only a static condition you're talking about. When you're looking for these imports to have a long-term impact on your manufacturing value addition, so you know that it is going to create employment for next 10 years. I mean, I think.
And what is the kind of employment you're talking about? If you're saying that, it's import-intensive exports,
right,
are we just looking at assembly line manufacturing?
Well, the large number, see, I think when anybody looking at the manufacturing employment, they need to really look at it in a very broad sense. Right now, most of the employment from the manufacturing seems to have shifted to service sector in terms of contractualization. So if somebody argues that employment has declined in manufacturing, that's only half truth. Now, many of the services within the manufacturing, like transport, security, accounting, many of the systems have been shifted to service sector. They have been contractualized. So if you add all those things, my view is that any rise in manufacturing should also lead to increase in employment opportunities.
All right. On that note, Professor Bhanumurthy, we'll have to wind up. Thank you very much for your insights, and thank you all for being with us on Policy Watch.